Hey guys, Kirk here, and thank you for joining me on a new video on the channel. In this video we're going to be looking at Runtime Virtual Textures and how to apply it to our landscape, and this will increase the performance of our scene as a whole, or our game world as a whole. At the moment, as you can see on screen here, we're getting pretty high detail from our landscape shader, which is exactly what I was looking for. Obviously it's not a finished product. The landscape shader nearly is a finished product, but at the moment obviously there's a lot of level editing and all that good stuff that would need to be done in this kind of level. But this series, Build Worlds V2, is all about creating a game world. So for level design and things like that, I may utilise this scene in the future, but that is out the scope of this tutorial. But yeah, so using Runtime Virtual Textures, essentially what that is going to do, it's going to store the information of our landscape shader, which is here at the top. This landscape shader here, it's going to store that information into one single texture, and then when we need it, or in the view of our camera, it's going to portray that shader there, and like around the back of the camera. So essentially I'm moving this camera now. Around the back of the camera, the texture will become blurry, and that's to reduce the cost of portraying that texture. And essentially that is what Runtime Virtual Texture does. It caches the information of our landscape shader and then utilizes the information when we need it in the view of the camera. Out of the scope of the camera, it makes the textures blurry, and so it reduces the cost. So essentially that's what Runtime Virtual Textures are, and what I want to do is showcase how we're going to apply that to this shader. Keep in mind I do have another video on Runtime Virtual Textures which I made last year. This could be seen as an updated one for the people who are following the Build Worlds V2 series, but if you're not following the series and you're just here for the RVT, then this kind of workflow will work for you. When I'm building the logic up, I will indicate if there is any changes, what I would perceive in a different kind of shader. I will try and spot that out and try and talk about it. Okay, so let's get on with building this up. The first thing you would need to do is to change or enable virtual textures in your project settings. You can come to edit at the top here and you've got project settings, or you can come to settings at the top right here and you'll have project settings there as well. Click on that and open up our project settings. Now you can see here we can click on all settings and just type in here Runtime Virtual Textures, but I'd rather show you where you would find them. So if we come down here on the left hand side in the category engine, we're going to look for rendering. So as you can see we've got rendering here, we're going to click on that, and as you can see here we have got our rendering options. You can see there is loads here, so to search through this many options when we're looking for one specific thing, what we can do is come to this little cog here at the top, click on that and collapse all categories, and that's going to collapse all our categories down and make it easier, the fifth one from the top, to find virtual textures. And we can click on that and you're not distracted by all the other options that you will get here in rendering. So what I have enabled here is virtual texture support. You would need to enable this. Virtual textures for opacity masks. This is something I'm testing, so you don't need to enable this. You have a tile size and a tile border size. Don't worry about the defaults here. You can change them within the virtual texture itself, so we will not worry about this. This is just indicating the minimum you can go to, which is the default. So all you need to do, guys, is just enable virtual texture support. If you have enabled virtual texture on light maps and on texture import and all that, you can go ahead and disable them or enable them, whichever one you want. But I will not be held responsible. But for now, for the sake of this tutorial, you just need to enable the virtual texture support. The texture on texture import is when you're in Quixel Bridge. Once this is enabled and you're in Quixel Bridge and you imported a texture, it will import them as a virtual texture. If you don't want that to happen, then always check here and make sure that is disabled. Now you've enabled this, you will have a restart button here at the bottom right. It will ask you to restart your engine. I would recommend pausing the video and restarting, because you will have a lot of shaders to compile, and depending on your machine or your ini files, it may take some time to compile them shaders. Okay, so that is enough of that. Now our virtual texture has been enabled. What we can do is come to the content drawer. If I right click, you'll see on the textures here, in the textures categories, I've got a runtime virtual texture. And if I come to the top here to my content box place thing, in the volumes, you'll see right at the bottom we have a runtime virtual texture volume, which we'll get into a little bit later on. Okay, so what I want to do is to come out of here one to my landscape folder in general. I'm going to right click and create a new folder. I'm just going to call this RVT, Runtime Virtual Textures. I'm going to jump inside that folder, and then I'm going to go to that textures category that I've just showcased and click on Runtime Virtual Texture. So for this, I'm going to name it RVT underscore landscape underscore color. If I spell it right, like so. And now we've got this, we can go ahead and open this up. The defaults that are set in here are quite alright. There's not much you would need to change from the start. These defaults are okay. Like we have our texture tile here and the border, like I was showcasing in the project settings, they're fine for now. The only thing you would need to make sure is that your virtual texture content is set to base color, normal, roughness and specular. For us, we only need base color, normal and roughness. Specular is not being used. I mean, you can do, in fact I am going to choose that, and I can then change the specular if needed in the future. You have these ones as well, which is YCOCG. They're just a little bit better quality, as you can see there. This requires more memory but may provide better quality. You can go ahead and check one of them if you have a high-end machine, but for the sake of this tutorial I'm just going to keep that one selected. Hit save and we can close that off. What I need to do now is to enable or apply virtual textures to our landscape. So what I can do, what I will shout out here guys, is that I have never built runtime virtual textures with a world partition landscape. It's always been a whole landscape. As we all know, or may know, world partition is relatively new to Unreal Engine. It was only introduced in 5.0 as experimental, and I think it still is experimental, but it's obviously a lot better than it used to be. But I have never got round to applying runtime virtual textures to a world partition, so this could either go well or go bad, but just bear with me with that. So what I need to do first is just click on the landscape, and I'm going to get all these options here for the landscape. And if I click the drop down, you'll see I've got all my streaming proxies for my world partition. What I'm going to do first is just apply virtual textures to this landscape as a whole. If that doesn't work, in case I can apply the virtual textures to all the streaming proxies. But for now, I'll just click on the landscape. And what I'm looking for down here, you can do the same as we did before, collapse all categories. And we're looking for virtual textures, which is here. Now we've got our virtual textures open up. You can see draw in virtual textures. If we go ahead and click that plus, just wait for that to build up. And you can see now I've got this little material slot. What we need to do is the virtual texture we've just built, we need to apply in here. So I'm going to click the drop down menu, and when you do that, it'll just obviously showcase the virtual texture. If you have more than one, you can find the one that you want to apply here, or you could go ahead and click on the actual texture itself, come into here and click this little arrow in the circle. Keep in mind, if you're using the drop down menu and you haven't created a virtual texture, you can just click on this at the top here for Runtime Virtual Texture and it'll create a new one for you. I'm just going to go ahead and select that one and just let this apply to my landscape. The good thing that I've seen here is that I've got 17 unsaved. If I go ahead and click on that, it's highlighted all my proxies, which I feel is going to apply this virtual texture to all these proxies. So I'm just going to head and just quickly save that. And now that's saved, that should be okay. Below that we've got a create volumes. And just like I showcased a bit before, in here where we have our volumes, runtime virtual texture volume, I'm going to see if this works. Keep in mind guys that this is a world partition, so I'm not sure if it's going to encompass the whole landscape, but we'll see. So I'm just going to click on create volumes. As you can see, it's created a volume. If I click on that, you can actually see it's actually put this around my landscape, which is absolutely brilliant. So if I zoom out here, go up, just keep zooming out, like so. Wow, this world's a lot bigger than I thought it was. But now you should clearly see that volume encompassing the whole landscape. And that's exactly what I wanted. Don't worry about the blue plane here guys, that's just a part of the Build Worlds V2 series that I'm doing, and that's just to imitate an ocean. Let's find that mannequin. There it is. Oh wait, I can just press 1. Okay, so now I'm quite happy that that's applied. That looked a little strange then. Look here, it's not applying it just yet, because we need to set it up. So now I've got my virtual texture volume. I'm going to press F2 and rename this to RVT underscore volume. Is that right? Is that how you spell volume? Yeah, it is. RVT volume. Wait there. No. RVTV volume underscore landscape color. Like so, and then we can just press enter. Now this is our color information. That's set up now. The set bounds is already done. You can see that's encompassed. And now we've created our runtime virtual texture. We've created our virtual texture volume. I'm going to drag that volume into our landscape folder. Keep it in there. And now what we need to do is apply some logic in our landscape material. So let's go across here. There is one thing that I am going to go on about here, is I'm using use material attributes. So this is just one output for the landscape shader. You may be using the standard version, which is make material attributes, where your output, it'll still be brown like this, but it may look like this. So there may be a few changes that you would need to make. But I would advise, if you're using this output and it looks like this, to change it to a use material attributes. But if you can't do that, then that's fine. But yeah, let's move on. So what I want is to right click and get runtime output, runtime virtual texture output. Now what I need to do is to drag all the information from our landscape material. Believe me, it doesn't look a lot, this landscape material, but it is. It's all inside there. But we need to get all that information from there and plug it into here. So I'm going to drag off our last output and get a get material attributes. And what I'm going to be using, if I open this up actually, and then if I go to any random layer, you'll see that I'm using albedo, roughness, normal and height. So I just need the albedo, roughness and normal outputs. If I draw off, close them up, and in the get material attributes, if you highlight it in the left hand side, we can go ahead and add a base color. I will add specular. No, I won't. I'll add the roughness in, and then normal in. And do I need height? I may need height. What I'm using for height is opacity, so I will choose opacity like so. But I'm not going to be using that in today's video, the height. I'm just sorting out runtime virtual textures for a landscape. When you go to use height, then you're going to initially be looking at blending assets to the landscape and all this good stuff. But I'm not sure I'm going to be doing that in this series, but then again I may do, so don't quote me on that. But for now, what we need to do is to apply our base colour to there, our specular value, I'll leave for a second, and roughness. Our specular value I'm going to drag off there and get a constant vector. And in here I'm just going to leave it as a 0, so we're getting no specular results. That's all for now. For the normal, we do need to convert this. So if I drag from the normal and get a transform, and essentially what I want to do is to convert all our information from tangent space to world space, and just simply apply that in the normal output for our Runtime Virtual Textures. And then the world height, we need to give our virtual textures the world height information, and we could simply do that by right clicking and just type world, and we'll get our world position, which is our absolute world position. And all I want is the z-axis, and if you've been following my channel along, you'll know that I use a component mask quite a lot to get a particular axis, as we have x, y and z, and these obviously migrate to that. So I'm going to enable our z-axis and disable the x and y, and then just simply plug that into our world height. You could also use a dot product and utilize a vector 3, put a 1 in the blue channel like so, and apply that in there. That can go into the world position, and that will go into the world height like so. This will work exactly the same, but you're just calculating length rather than just getting the raw axis value. So we'll plug that into world height. Now with that being done, we can go ahead and hit apply, and what this is doing now is getting all our information and any additional information that we've applied here and putting it into our virtual texture output. So if I come into my content drawer, this should update. As you can see, it's updated, and now you can actually see the colour. I go up like this and just keep going up. Let's speed that camera up a little bit, up to about 7. I go straight up and just look down at the landscape. Like I said, we're getting our z-axis, which is straight vertically down like so. So if I look like this downwards and come to the landscape and look at this, I'll zoom it in. You'll see that this kind of looks like this, but it needs to be rotated. Let's do this. Let's just straighten it up. I'm getting a bit carried away with this little bit. But you can see there, we're looking down at that, and our virtual texture looks the same. They may look different, but the thing that's causing that is this. So if you look at it like that now, you can see it kind of looks similar to that, which is fine. Okay, so let's go ahead and find our mana, press 1. Okay, so now if we go into our RVT volume support, this should update, and you can see that in our content drawer, that virtual texture and this virtual texture now looks the same. So our information from our landscape shader is being plugged into our virtual texture, and now our virtual texture and our virtual texture volume, and if I'm right, the landscape should be updated with that virtual texture. So now that's updated, that's where it ends, I'm afraid. Not the tutorial, just where the information ends. And now it comes into here. We're all set up to a certain degree. What we need to do now for this to work, if I go to my optimization view mode, shader complexity, you'll see nothing's changed. And that's because we've applied the information needed to our virtual texture, but we're not applying that virtual texture information to our actual landscape shader, which is what is needed. So we can go ahead and apply that now. So if we go ahead and right click and just type runtime, and what we need to get is the runtime virtual texture sample, and this node is essentially going to sample our virtual texture. So in the details panel on the left hand side, you'll see our virtual texture. If I click the drop down, you'll see our landscape color virtual texture. If we go ahead and click on that, Now all the information that is coming from our landscape shader into here, into the output, is being stored in this node here. Its main priority is to apply all the information into the virtual texture asset itself. And now we've got that, we need to apply that information from the virtual texture back into the landscape shader for the landscape shader to take full effect of the virtual texture, which will then reduce the complexity and all that good stuff. So now we've got our runtime virtual texture sample, we've applied the virtual texture, our virtual texture content stayed the same with base color, normal, roughness and specular. If it's not, and you just got base color, you can go ahead and make sure that this virtual texture content matches whatever is inside here, which is our virtual texture content, and you should be fine and dandy. Okay, so what I need to do to apply this to our landscape shader is to, where we get the information here, I need to set the information. So if I right click and type set material attributes, and we're going to apply the same. So I've got base color, roughness, normal. I'm not going to bother with opacity just yet. So I'm going to apply this base color, roughness. Actually, I will apply a specular as well, because we're putting a value of 0 into our specular output, and then I can drag that straight in here. Which you can see I've got base color, specular and roughness, whereas here I've got base color, roughness and specular. If you want to swap that order, which I want to do, if you highlight it here on the left hand side, you'll see multiple dots and the hand or the mouse cursor changes. So just click and hold and drag it above until you see that blue line, and that'll just create the orders, or you could simply just change them in the menu here. I want to apply a normal to that as well. Normal, yeah. Opacity, I'm not going to worry about that. I've added it here for future reference, but for now the height is not a major problem. So I'm going to drag from this base color, and then we'll do the specular roughness. And now I need to do the normal, but at the moment inside the shader itself, because we need to apply world space normals to our texture input, so our texture asset, virtual texture asset as world space values, I need to now, because we're back inside the landscape shader, I need to convert it back. So if I just simply duplicate our transform vector, I'm going to normal, plug that in there and in there, but make sure to change this. At the moment our source, which is our information it's grabbing, is tangent space, and the destination, which it's trying to apply to, is world space, and we've already got that. What we need to is our source be world space, and we're applying it back to tangent space, and you can do that there in the details panel like so. And then I can simply drag that into our output, and our output is there now. But I do want to apply a switch, so I'm going to drag off our set material attributes and get a switch. So if you just type switch, and I'm going to use just a static switch parameter for now, I'll just put enable RVT. That's it for now. This is just for testing purposes, guys, so I'm not going to change. Well, I will do actually. I'll change the group to what I need, which is important material controls. And I'll just leave that maybe 5, and that should be relatively near the top. I could drag that into my output. You can see we're getting that error because we need a false input, and you can simply drag from here. So if I drag from our layer blend node, which is the final output, well, it's not our macro variation is, but I've collapsed that just for the sakes of this tutorial. And then I'm going to simply drag that from there. So if I choose false, which is defaulting at as false, it's just going to get the information and plug it straight in. So that means it will essentially be like it's just doing that. And cut out all this information here, and it's just going from layer blend into there, like where we started with. If I drag that in there, now I get to choose whether I want RVT or not. And that is it. If I go ahead and hit apply, it should start compiling shaders. and I'll leave it on this screen why it is compiling and it is not compiling. There's a good reason for that, because I need to enable it. I'm going to enable it. This is defaulted now to enable. Hit apply, and it should start compiling shaders. Well, that was fairly quick actually, but it has applied. As you can see now, Runtime Virtual Textures is working. As you can see, it's not the best results, but let's slow that back down to default, which is 4. It's right there. As you can see, it's not the best results for here, but the performance is much better. If I come back to lit, optimization view modes, and shader complexity, you'll see now from here, when we was up here, really bad, we're now just leaving the green into the brown, which is relatively good. That's exactly what I was looking for. But you can see the texture quality for our landscape is not great. This is one of the downsides to virtual textures. Essentially, I can open this up, this Runtime Virtual Texture, and in the size of virtual texture in tiles, I can increase this. So I'll maybe go to 1K, and you can see the quality building. If I increase that by 1, and now you can see the quality of our texture is increased. But if we go to lit mode, optimization view mode, shader complexity, you can see our shader complexity is still relatively low, which is exactly what we want. So if I switch that back to lit, you can see that our textures don't look incredibly great at the minute. That's because of the UV scale. Now this is one downside to Runtime Virtual Textures and utilizing a 3-tier UV system, that it does affect that UV system. So if I open up material instance, and you'll see here I've got enable RVT on, and you can see our UVs are not great. Which I have noticed with this is it flips it. So if I go to this ground grass, you can see my UVs near is 1100, mid is 650, and far is 250. But if I increase this, you can see nothing is changing. And this is the thing I was talking about, is it just affects the UVs. But if I put these to a 1 and a 1, you can see not really much changes. But if I increase the far, it should technically start to change the UVs of our grass, which it is doing there. I don't want to go too high. If I go back down, you can see the grass has gone to that large scale. If I increase that now to maybe 900, 910, you can see that's changed. This is still the same, but if I scroll down here and find my dirt UV controls and just put these two to 1 and then increase that so around the same at 900, you can see that that is changed there as well. And you can see we're getting these little patches. That's our inner side of our dirt. I'll come here, do the same again, set these both to 1 because for some reason they're redundant now, and I can just increase this to around this value here, around 900. And you can see now that we're getting a lot better performance. Our UVs have gone normal, if you like, and it kind of looks alright, but this is a downside to using Runtime Virtual Textures, is that it's actually got to grab the information from our virtual texture and apply it to the landscape based on your camera vision. If I spin around quick, you can see all these are blurry, like I stated at the beginning of the video, and that's essentially what it's doing. It blurs out the textures behind the camera and then reapplies them. But in runtime, you may get some warnings up here, don't worry about that. In runtime, it looks fine. We're all good here now. Our texture streaming pool is over budget, and our landscape physical material needs to be built. Don't worry about all that right now. But as you can see, it's all okay, and this is exactly what I was looking for. Okay, so that is it. Oh, here's the caveat. what we need to do, if you get this issue, this is just a cache issue. So we'll go ahead and save this. And like I've done many a times in this series, we're going to come up to the top, recent levels, reset map. We'll just load in. There's nothing to load because there's nothing inside the reset map. And then we can just come to File, Recent Levels, Build Worlds V2, and load it back up. It should be back to normal. Let's move it to build, and there you go. So there is obviously downsides to Runtime Virtual Textures, but that's the case for anything in Unreal Engine. You can see here the flickering, that's just the building of the virtual texture information. But yeah, that's pretty much it. If I go to lit mode, optimization view mode, shader complexity, you can see we're a lot better on performance there and everything is right. If you're planning on using your scene, if you've been following along with the series as a kind of cinematic or something that needs to be high quality, I would not recommend Runtime Virtual Textures. You'll just have to suck up the performance for a cinematic. But for game engines, games, this landscape shader is perfectly fine. So yeah, hopefully that's really helped you out, guys, and you've now applied Runtime Virtual Textures. I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing in the next video. I may be looking at the height and blending RVT. I do have videos about RVT and blending assets for the landscape in a previous video that I did last year, but I may apply it to this. But if not, then we will be moving along to sorting out our multiple biome landscape shader, which is going to be relatively easy to do, which you will be surprised about. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Give us a like, a subscribe, and I shall see you in the next video. Thank you.